Let me officially welcome you to Launch with the List. We are here to help launch Dr. Tasha Eurich's Shatterproof, her third book. She's a New York Times bestselling author, the number one self-awareness coach. And this book, Shatterproof, went to number one last week on Amazon in behavioral sciences, which is really a phenomenal achievement. And thank you for coming to help us meet this moment, because this is the moment that we all need our resilience and our shatterproofness. Tiffany Dufu, president of the Tory Burch Foundation, um, author of Drop the Ball, beloved longtime member of the list, is going to help moderate this conversation today and tap into her own deep wells of expertise to help us really put this amazing book to use in our lives. And so, with that, I'm going to go into the background and be your helpful moderator. Put your questions in the chat. I will surface them as we go. I'm also going to put links to buy the book that you should feel free to share with all of your friends. Buy a book for yourself. Buy a book for a pal. And as I learned at a recent book launch that we did, buy a third book to leave somewhere for serendipity for someone to find it. With that, Tiffany, I turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If fangirling is expertise, I am an expert on Tasha Eurich. That is for sure, as I suspect a few of you are as well. And I have had the pleasure and the joy and the just transformation of reading Shatterproof, which we're going to be talking about today. I will say that I've been on the Tasha Eurich train for a long time. The first book that I read that she wrote was Insight. And I shared with her before all of you hopped on that one of the things I really appreciate her writing and her thought leadership is that it's sticky. You know, I feel that there was Tiffany Dufu before Insight, and then there was Tiffany Dufu after Insight. And similarly, there was Tiffany Dufu before Shatterproof, and now there's Tiffany Dufu after Shatterproof. And this will stick with me for the rest of my life. So I can't thank you enough, Tasha, for writing this book. We could speak for an hour and a half, but we're going to go about 30 minutes. Please, all of you, get your questions ready. I'm not going to hog the entire time. We're going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. But one of my first questions for you, Tasha, is about who this book is for. You know, I'm always skeptical when an author tells me that their book is for everyone. Because there's so much power in specificity, and because I really believe in being strategic and tangible about the audience that you're trying to reach. But right now, in today's world, this book honestly is for everyone. I really do believe that it is. It's like probably the only book I've read that I'm like, no. Every single person should read this book. Can you talk though about who you wrote this book for? Because you have this term called stressed out strivers that I thought was really fascinating. And I think it'd be helpful for everyone here to understand who it's for.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that very, very generous introduction, Tiffany. And I love you to death, and I'm so happy to be here. Yes, so I did write the book for my fellow stressed out strivers. And the way I define that are, in the context of the world that we live in, accelerating uncertainty, just unending demands on us. People are going to have various reactions to that. Very kind of like type B, not very motivated people are going to go with the flow. And then the people who are going to have the most trouble are the people who are trying to achieve great things, right? But who are feeling crushed by the demands and the uncertainty, and how there's always the pressure to do more with less. And there's always one more thing we have to do unless we drop the ball. And so I think that the world that we live in is objectively getting more uncertain and chaotic. But I think that it's us. Like I wrote this for us. I wrote this for me to an extent. I have a theory that I always write the book that I need at the time. And I think that was especially true here. So I'm curious, did that term resonate with you?
Hmm. Not in the beginning, but we're going to get to
Mm.
that. Okay.
Mm.
Because when I read that stressed out strivers were people who were goal oriented, I saw myself. Seeking success and fulfillment. Okay, fine. I see myself. Who feel exhausted by chronic compounding challenges across multiple areas of life. And I said to myself, oh, Tiffany, no, 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 that's not you. And then we got to this next term that we're going to deconstruct here called mustivation. Now, I have teenagers in my life right now, and I have this phrase that I find myself using with them that any of you who have parented teenagers will understand, which is, well, I do what I'm supposed to do around here. I find myself saying that quite often. And I realized in scrambling past stressed out strivers. By the way, Tasha's books are not always easy for me to read because I learn a lot about myself that I don't necessarily want to know. So that full disclaimer is that it takes me a while because in the beginning, I think I'm just reading it for other people, not for myself. But when I got to Mustivation, I realized that, oh my God, there's a lot that I do out of obligation. So can you talk about mustivation as separate from motivation? I thought this was brilliant, and it's one of the things that makes this sticky.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I love it because we immediately know what it means, right?
Right.
Motivation. So there's basically two ways that we can be driven to do anything, right? Whether it's achieve a goal, to do a task, anything like that. One of them we call sort of intrinsic motivation. And we do that because it's something we want to do. It's something that is challenging. It's something that feeds our passion. It's something that we're good at. It's something that helps us grow. And that's kind of the idea of what true motivation is. But I think for all of us, if we, consider our lives, if we look at our Outlook calendars, if we think about how we're really spending our time, my guess would be it's more mustivation heavy. And that's the second type of motivation, which is we could call it extrinsic motivation, right? It's doing things because we feel like we should, doing things because other people are, asking us or forcing us to do them, doing things because we feel guilty if we don't do them. Like nobody's asking us to do them, but if we don't do them, we feel guilty. So there's also, internal pressures that can create motivation. But I sort of feel like we could really boil it down to the secret to happiness and fulfillment is to tip the scales over to motivation and away from motivation. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't all have things that we have to do that we don't love every day, but are we truly strategically designing our lives that way? I mean, I can tell you I'm not doing a very good job of living this book right now because I'm doing a bunch of stuff that I kind of have to do for the book launch. And the other piece of that too is sometimes we put motivation onto things that we're so stressed out that we sort of feel like we're losing the joy. And so what I've been trying to do, because I've got these bonus chapters. I said I would give them out at some point, so I probably have to write them. I would normally be really excited about that. I would have internal motivation, but I'm so stressed and I'm so busy that it's like this thing that I have to do. And so maybe just the last thing I'll say is for that, sometimes we motivate ourselves when we're really doing things that we can find the joy in again, if we just pause and just think.
Thank you for sharing that because I did see that there were bonus chapters and thought, oh my God, she's already written those too. Thank you so much, Tasha, for saying that you haven't written them yet.
They don't exist. Yeah, they will come into the world when they're coming into the world.
I just love you for that. Okay, so I want to talk about resilience because Anne mentioned resilience, and I had a strong perspective on resilience before reading Shatterproof. And I understand that resilience can be a very positive thing. But this idea, this quote that we use often, that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. I literally fell out of my chair when I read about this dude who published this book with this quote in it in 1889, Nietzsche. So can you actually tell the story
Mhm.
of him writing this book and then what happened, and talk to us about your perspective on resilience and why it's just not sufficient?
Mhm. I love that. I love that story as a way into that. That's really, really smart. I'm a fourth generation entrepreneur. I like to think that resilience and grit are in my DNA. And so, like all of us, I grew up with my fair share of challenges and like I always muscled through. And right around when COVID was starting and when, everybody was grounded and kind of wherever you were, and I was used to kind of being out in the world, I started to notice that all of my normal resilience tools weren't working. And so I started a 5-year research program, essentially trying to figure out like what was going on here, right? Is there something about resilience that isn't working anymore? Is there something about the world that's incompatible with resilience? But along the way, I found this story that actually made everything clear in a sense. So Nietzsche, famous philosopher, he, as far as I can tell, is the first published instance of that aphorism. What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. So he published this, and Tiffany, you've got the book in front of you. How many weeks or months later was it? It was
Um, Barely a month.
okay, barely a month. I need to commit that to memory. Barely a month later
After
after he
he
published
publishes,
this.
after he publishes
Mhm,
the book comes out in January 1889.
mhm. So he's walking through a square in Turin, and he sees this horrible scene. There's a man beating a horse, right? Like a carriage horse. And he kind of loses it. He just melts down and he runs over to the horse and he hugs it and he starts crying. And the police are called and he has to be escorted home. And according to his best friend, he basically descended into madness at that point, was admitted into a mental institution from which he never emerged. So just let that sit with you for a second, right? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And then there's, in some sense, you could argue that that's falling down under the weight of a feather. Like, obviously, animal cruelty, geez, I mean, worst thing ever. But in the context of Nietzsche's life, that was not going to be a central force. But when we exhaust our resilience enough, we reach the ceiling of what it can do for us to cope. And, I talk to a lot of people like CEOs I coach or just readers and clients who say, I was fine until the second I wasn't. And that's where I can kind of circle back to when I was experiencing my own resilience ceiling. What we were discovering in our research was that, when you played telephone when you were a kid, right? And you would tell someone and they would tell someone, and by the time it got to the fifth or sixth person, it would be a totally different message. That's kind of what's happened with the hardcore resilience research and the way we think about it in popular terms. It's kind of the gold standard. It has magical powers. If we just, do enough yoga, if we just do enough, positive thinking or gratitude journaling, that we won't just survive tough times, but we'll like thrive through them. And that is not empirically true, first of all. But then the second piece to that is resilience is a limited resource. And as soon as you understand that, like Anne, you were giving, your experience about how the other day you were like, I don't have it in me to do this moment right now, and I've done my yoga and I've done my meditating, and I think so many of us have had that experience. That doesn't mean that you're failing at resilience. It means that we're expecting resilience to do something for us that it was never designed to do. Resilience is designed to help us survive. It's designed to help us bounce back to the status quo. And by the way, I don't know about you guys, but like when I'm trying to bounce back so hard, usually I'm bouncing back to something that I wasn't really even happy with in the first place. So that was what this book was about, was trying to find if resilience, first of all, if resilience isn't the end all be all in the first place, and the world that we live in is causing us to, kind of lose more of it more quickly, what was that alternative? So that was, Tiffany, did I hit on the main points you were
You
looking for?
did. You did so beautifully. For me, because you wrote about it quite a bit, but for me, what clicked was this distinction between reactive versus proactive.
Mhm.
That resilience is reactive and that becoming shatterproof is proactive. So can you talk about what it means to be shatterproof? Can you
Mhm.
define that so that everyone can understand this distinction? Because that was the sticky part for me, and the part that, as I talk about the difference between what it means to be resilient and what it means to be shatterproof, that's how I'll describe it.
Mhm. Yeah, I would love, I'll give you mine and then maybe we can go back and forth because I think the term shatterproof, you can sort of simplify it, but there's so much nuance to it. So I'd be interested in just hearing what struck you. But at a fundamental level, what the difference between being resilient and becoming shatterproof is proactively deciding that you're going to move away from bouncing back and you're going to move towards growing forward, right? So bouncing back to growing forward. And at the heart of it, what that means is deciding it's a mindset, first of all. It's deciding that we're worth more than barely getting by. I don't know about you guys, but I was feeling pretty sick of barely getting by. And there's some days that that's still true, right? Because becoming shatterproof is a process. But when we are able to harness our toughest moments and our cracks, if we use this framework that we discovered in the book, we actually can become wiser, stronger, smarter, readier, and wiser in the face of our toughest moments. And I think, sometimes people say, well, tell me like an action, like what do shatterproof people do differently? And the sort of first step there, I think, is instead of powering through those tough moments, right? Like, Anne, like, I don't know if I can get through this moment. Um, we pause on purpose and we ask ourselves a question like, how am I showing up right now in a way that's different from my best self? Or what do I need right now that I'm not getting that's causing, some of this friction? Because when our core needs are unmet, that's when we lose the best version of ourselves, right? We snap, we break down, we ghost our own lives. And so shatterproof people pause on purpose and find new ways to meet their needs.
Absolutely. I used to have this phrase before I dropped the ball that when the going gets tough, the tough work harder. And this was just such a reminder. It's like, no, no, when the going gets tough, the tough slow down. They don't push harder, they do less. And so I think that that's a really important step. The other important step that I think can be helpful to all of us that I'd love for you to talk about is how is the relationship to pain?
Mhm.
Because pain used to be something that I thought I should push through. But pain is actually essential for growth. And I think I especially thought about this in the context of parenting, because a lot of parenting is about I think unhealthy parenting is about preventing your children from experiencing pain.
Mm.
And it's part of why we're in the crisis that we're in with young people. I'm the trustee of a university, so I see them when they're trying to launch and they're not launching effectively because of that. But can you talk about the relationship between really identifying and leveraging and using our pain as opposed to avoiding it as a step towards being shatterproof?
So I have a friend who runs leadership development for a big multinational corporation in the Middle East. And every year they kind of bring their leaders together and they do a, leadership conference. And the most recent conference that he had, they were talking about, some similar ideas to Shatterproof. And he started his session by asking all the executives to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in mental toughness. And so they all proudly rated themselves a 10, right? I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have gotten where I got in life if I wasn't a 10 out of 10 mentally tough. And then they were quite surprised when my friend began to explain to them that that's actually not the best answer. To be 10 out of 10 in mental toughness, it closes us off in so many ways. I think in the context of paying attention to our pain, if you think about it, like most of the ways that human beings are wired are because they provided some type of advantage to our ancestors for either survival or reproduction. And when we were physically in pain, that was a signal that something was wrong, right? If you scratch your arm on a branch and you're bleeding, you've got to pay attention to that. You can't just keep going along on your day. The same is true for psychological pain. So the needs that I was talking about, there's three fundamental needs that human beings need to have met that we are biologically programmed to seek. Again, they gave our ancestors advantages in survival.
Everybody, I just want to pause. Everyone paid very close attention. Are you going to go through the needs, Tasha?
I'm just going to go through them really quickly, and then
Okay,
I'm going
go
to
through
bounce
them.
back
Yes,
to the pain.
everyone, please, because this is the part when she talks about the needs. This is like the part in my book where I had like the most underlining and the most exclamation points. So it's
That's
okay,
great.
Tasha, if you need to take just a moment to go
Mhm.
through those three needs.
So, yeah, and maybe I'll do it and then we can pop back to that
Yeah.
if you want to, or if anybody has any questions. So, the three needs that we're, again, biologically programmed to seek, like I'm thirsty, I need water, the same sort of level of need. Number one is, I call it confidence. And that's the sense that we are doing well and getting better, right? So, we're performing adequately, we know what we're doing, we're competent, and we're getting better. The second need is choice. And what that is a sense of agency and a sense of authenticity. So we are being who we are in the world and we are in charge of our lives. And then the third need is connection. And what that's about is feeling like we belong and having mutually supportive, close relationships. And the mutually supportive is a really important part of that. So, and we can, again, pop back to them. But what happens when we're experiencing psychological pain at a fundamental level is one or more of those needs is being frustrated. So why on earth, just the same way that we wouldn't ignore a tree branch, gouging our arms, why would we push through that powerful signal that something isn't quite right in our lives? And by the way, I call this the pain paradox. There's actually empirical evidence that shows that when we push through our pain to kind of like avoid breaking, it gives us temporary relief, but there is a rebound. So we actually have more negative emotions in the long run because of it. So what I tell people is pain is not a personal failure. It's a power source and an opportunity to pay attention. And I think, that's actually the first step of the Shatterproof roadmap that I talk about is let's stop just going through our day and just saying like, it's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine. Maybe we're not ready to say that to others, but maybe just to say to ourselves, like, what am I not getting right now that is making me feel this way? That's step one.
Absolutely. I know you haven't written the bonus chapters, but for the one on like organizational, being organizational shatterproof, I just kept thinking about these three needs in the context of any responsibility we have for any other people,
Mhm,
in
mhm.
our lives. I think about it in the context of management, of people who are on my team. How am I supporting them and providing opportunities for them to have developed the confidence that they need to thrive here?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
how am I supporting and making sure that they have the choice? Am I micromanaging them? You know, or am I giving them the agency and the freedom to be able to do their jobs the way that their talent and their ingenuity, could support them in doing? And how am I ensuring that they have the connection that they
Hmm.
need, that I'm fostering the kind of culture where people can get those three needs? I've thought about it in the context of parenting. I've thought about it in the context of my marriage. It's why it's so sticky.
Yeah.
And so I just love you for that.
Thanks. Yeah, well, and I think it simplifies things, right? If you have that model and it's you pay attention to yourself and others, I think like leadership is a good example. Leadership is really hard and really complex, and there's so many different demands placed on leaders. But talk about a helpful, shortcut, right? Like we don't have to buy another mindfulness app for our people. Like just ask, what are we doing to instill confidence, to give them choice, to make sure that there's, healthy, mutually supportive connection. It goes such a long way.
Such a long way. Okay, listen, get your questions ready. I just have one more question. Actually, I have a gazillion more questions, but I'm going to be kind and
We
not
could say
hog
it
all
forever.
the time. I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Anne. We're going to turn it over to you to ask some questions here. One of my favorite quotes, I don't know, maybe someone can help me with who the author of this quote is, but I heard it many years ago. Someone told me to break often, not like porcelain, but like waves.
Hmm.
And for me, it was a very helpful
Hmm.
reminder about the power of vulnerability, Tiffany, of vulnerability. And when I think about waves, I think about the tide, coming in. Maybe sometimes it's going out, but it's a very organic, fluid process. And right now, we're experiencing a tremendous amount of chaos and breaking that feels
Mhm.
abnormal. And I'm just wondering, given everything happening in the world, how are you moving forward? How are you ensuring that your tide is rising in the midst of everything that's happening? And on top of that, you've got a book that you're selling and that you're promoting.
So, because we're among friends, I'm going to be very vulnerable and very honest. In your question about vulnerability, um, in the context of everything that is going on in the world in general, we all have our own challenges, right? My marriage of 15 years ended right as I was finishing this book, like rather quickly and unexpectedly. Um, I my I'm living in a temporary apartment because in January my beloved loft biblically flooded to the point where it's going to need to, probably take, I don't know, maybe I can move in by the end of this year. Um, and then I fell in love again and I lost him. And so all of these things, they show us that the worst thing that you think is going to happen to you is always a moment in time, right? And for me, the process of becoming shatterproof is about continually making that choice, right? No matter what you faced before, no matter what you're facing now, no matter what is ahead of you, are you asking yourself, am I making sure that my needs matter? And am I committed to building maybe not the life I wanted, but a new good life? To me, and there are days, right? Like there are days that you just can't be shatterproof. And you need, and by the way, there's a tool I talk about in the book when you just can't, like, that moment when you just can't. It's called the 2-2-2 method. But by and large, it's funny, I've been reading my own book a lot lately. And not because I think I'm so great, but because I learned so much from this research and from the people we interviewed and the stories we found. Um, I think we just have to keep at it. We have to keep going and keep choosing that growing forward and that building a new good life.
Beautiful. Share the leaf on the stream exercise.
Oh, that's a good one. I need to use that more.
Yeah.
Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
So it's a cognitive behavioral therapy technique where when we find ourselves really flooded with negative emotions, Ideally, if you can like go sit somewhere quietly, but you could do it on the subway too. You can, anywhere you can sort of take this tool. But you close your eyes and you imagine that every time you have one of those thoughts, right? The thought for me of like, I'm going to be single forever, right? I take one of the thoughts and I put it on a leaf that I imagine is sort of gently flowing down a stream. And when the thought comes out of my head and goes onto the leaf, I just watch it float away. And each thought goes on a leaf. And what I've noticed when I've tried that tool, I need to do it more. But when I tried it, you sort of run out of the thoughts, right? Like if every time you're having a thought and it's going down the river or the stream, then you're a little clearer and you've kind of expunged them. Like you've honored them, you've placed them somewhere, you've said, you do not need to be in my brain anymore. And then hopefully you can go on about your day with a little bit more peace.
It works. I've tried it too. Thank
Does
you.
it? Yeah, it's surprising. It's surprisingly effective for something so simple.
That's great. And we're going to turn it over to you.
Um, Thank you. I am back. I'm really moved here and I've taken notes. And I want to thank you for this conversation so far. I also want to tell you, Tiffany, break often not like porcelain, but like waves. Scheherazade
Thank
Siobhan.
you. Thank you.
Okay, starting with Fabian, Tasha touched on resilience ceiling. What are some
Mhm.
key indicators that someone might be approaching or exceeding their resilience limits?
Love that question. And I think that's a really important thing for us to all pay attention to. So there's three clues that you might be starting to run out of resilience. The first one, I call it lost mojo. Like you just have less energy, you have less of that intrinsic motivation to keep all the plates spinning. You might like something might go wrong and you're like, whatever. And not because you don't care, but because you almost like can't care. The second clue is that little things feel big. And you might notice that you're getting kind of unusually worked up over things that wouldn't bother, the normal you or the best you. But then I think the most blaring indicator is that your top coping tools or your top resilience tools are failing. Because what that means is, we've all got our go-tos, but once our resilience is really starting to run out, they feel more like piling on than providing relief. When I was kind of in my resilience crisis, I turned this into like the most embarrassing type A exercise where I swear to God, I made an Excel spreadsheet of all of my resilience practices and I printed it out. And every day I would check the resilience practices that I had done. And I noticed over time that it was getting harder and harder, right? And I was like, no pain, no gain. But we really have to pay attention. When resilience starts to fail us, that's when we have to pivot to becoming shatterproof. And by the way, when we become shatterproof, it feeds our resilience. So the act itself is restorative to our level of resilience.
I love that. That is beautiful. I also really love the idea restorative. It's there for you. You have it. You need to just deepen it, get it. And
Mhm.
it's beautiful. Pam says, she's been working so hard with meditation and yoga. Is there still a benefit to all that work? Are you saying don't bother
Mm.
with those things?
So really simple answer. If it helps, do it. If it doesn't help, like I have a coaching client, a CEO who has been forcing himself to meditate for the last 6 months. And he says it actually makes him feel like an angrier person because he hates it so much. Right? I kind of feel the same way about meditation personally. It's not as personally helpful for me. So I think don't use mustivation for self-care. Maybe would be the way that I would sum that up, right? If it works, if it doesn't,
Amazing. Um, uh, I have a question. I want to pop in my question while since I'm in charge of the
yeah,
group.
it's your
I have
show.
a question. I wonder. um, how you came to this in the first place, right? You have insight. You are a self-awareness expert. There are many places that you could have gone with your next book, with your next idea. Why was this one
Mhm.
the one that caught your imagination?
Well, I'm laughing a little bit internally with that question because this book, Tiffany knows this. This book was like about five things before was about this. It started, fun fact, as a book on forgiveness at work, which you're like, that has nothing to do. I can tell you there is one table in Shatterproof that says forgiveness. And that is the only thing that remains from the original concept of this book. Because what happened was when we were doing our research, so this is, big research program. We analyzed, 1,300 scientific studies. We collected data, quantitative and qualitative across lots of data sets. But we started with interviews of people who were like, tell us about a time when a bad thing happened to you. And it was more sophisticated than that, of course. But, what happened? How did you cope? You know, where did you land, basically? And from that process emerged, basically, there were three ways that people typically responded. There was a small group of people that sort of broke when bad things happened. Most people, almost everybody, bounced back, right, to where they were before. But this tiny third group somehow was becoming better and stronger and wiser and all the things that we've been talking about today. And this book, it was basically like I thought I was writing one book, and then I found this third group of people, and it sent me down a rabbit hole, the most wonderful rabbit hole ever that I think honestly saved my life at the time I was going through a really bad health crisis. And I used the tools that I learned and ended up kind of, being so much better off. So I guess maybe as for anybody who's struggling with a book concept, I guess this is sort of anti what we've been talking about, but Winston Churchill said, if you're going through hell, keep going. I would advocate keep going. Like if something tilts you off course, it might be exactly where you need to go.
I love that. And I love that you immediately found use for it in your own life, right? That it was not, that it was a signal, um, maybe a little magic, maybe a little manifestation, that you were in the right place at the right time and that this was the work that you needed to do. And this book couldn't, honestly have come at a more perfect time when we are all feeling as tapped out as we are. Daisy Auger Dominguez, whose book is From Burnt Out to Lit Up, says that she reads her own, she's in the chat, said that she reads her own book as a reminder of what she's been through when she needs to like reimagine, and tap into her shatterproofness again. Um, will you talk about, Evelyn Rodstein says resilience can be accepting and growing with a new reality, having a special needs child you accept, you love, you can still have
Mhm.
periodic mourning moments on children's birthdays, or a new CEO who had been managing turnaround and then takes a new job in a healthy business and it turns out to be in danger. I wanted to go back, Evelyn, you sparked something, a question for me about, um, modeling shatterproofness for children or
Mhm.
for other people, right? The ways in which, um, not only is this about your own resilience, your own shatterproofness, but the people around you. Um, do you have some stories that you can share about how those things, about the ripple effects? I see Tiffany smiling around the ripple effects, that you in your own self can have around the people around you.
Tiffany, do you have, I feel like you have something to say about this.
Well, I was just thinking about our last Shiro in the book. And I think you should tell her story because it's just such a beautiful example.
So this is a hard story to tell quickly. So I'm going to hit the high points, but really point you toward the story itself. It's about a woman known in her community as Mama Shu. And she lives in Highland Park, Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit that really, had fallen under hard times. And it was actually where the first Ford Model T factory was built. But then the auto industry fled and the city basically plunged into literal darkness. And by literal darkness, I mean the utility company repossessed their streetlights. So this was a not an easy place to live, but she was a leader in her community. Somebody, she had a million different hats that she wore. She was a public servant. She was a teacher. She volunteered at her church, and Mama Shu was being shatterproof when the story started. And then every mother's worst nightmare happened to her. Her 2-year-old son was walking with her older son across the street. They were holding hands like they had been taught. And her younger son was killed by a hit and run driver. If you imagine the grief and that she said, breathing felt like inhaling shards of glass. And nobody would have blamed her for giving up, right? Nobody would have blamed her for any response that she had. Um, but Mama Shu kind of looked into the ruins of her life and wanted to build something. She wanted to build something where something had been lost, and she knew she could never replace her child. But she kept driving by the same block on her way to work. And it was, in horrible disrepair. There were old mattresses and trash everywhere. And she couldn't stop picturing how beautiful that block could be. And it took her several months of scraping and saving, but with a loan from her sister and part of a tax refund, she bought her first house on Avalon Street for $3,000. And I think it was 12 years later, they had revitalized this entire block, she and an army of volunteers in their community. And what she said was, I was transforming my grief into glory and my loss into love and building something for her community. They have a STEAM lab, they have a women's business incubator. Ellen DeGeneres gave them this whole area for the neighborhood, and they tried to raise like $50,000, but then they raised $250,000. They have a homework house for kids for it to be a safe place for them to land after school, to get counseling, therapy, to do their laundry. Um, and should I tell the second part, Tiffany?
Why not? I'm looking at the
Yeah,
time. We have six
I
minutes.
think
We have six
it's
minutes.
it's yeah, it's tough, but it's how life is. By that time, her older son that had been holding her younger son's hand was kind of her partner in creating Avalon Village. And he was working security one night and was shot and killed at point blank range by two men who were just walking through the area. And again, nobody would have blamed her for stopping. Nobody would have blamed her for saying, you know what, I'm out. You guys, we've done so much good. Um, but she doubled down. She installed more security cameras. She built a community volunteer security force for the area. She said, no mother will experience what I experienced. And today, it's 3 city blocks. She's still not done. If you want to learn more about her, just Google Mama Shu. If you Google Mama Shu and Anderson Cooper, there's a really great podcast that she did with him. But she has plans to have more blocks. She wants to build market rate housing. And so after the two, it's like lightning striking twice. I don't think any of us will ever even begin to go through anything a fraction as hard as that. Um, and then if you look at the ripple effects that still created, I think we can, if we can become shatterproof, we start to transform the people around us.
That's beautiful. I want to give you one more question so that we can leave this amazing audience on an up note because
Yes. That's why I
I'm
was like, should I answer?
I'm feeding you a question from the audience, but what I think could lead to a nice moment of optimism for us. Felicia says, "I wish your books were and others like them were available to those of us who are now in our 60s who had to search and support for community over the last
Mm,
decades." And so, um, because we're here with the list, because we are in community together, because Tiffany is in community with us, because this is a group that prides itself on its generosity and its connection. I would love for you to share with this group. Um, you said in our three needs, confidence, choice, and connection. But how do you, and maybe this is a you question, or maybe this is a book question, but
mhm,
how do you nurture those communities of support so that you have those needs met? Not necessarily, I'm not saying this is self-serving for the list. It doesn't have to be about
mhm.
the list. But I think that it is skill building, right? That not everybody knows how to do, and not everybody can plop themselves down in the center of a group and immediately feel connected.
Mhm. I Part of me wants to punt that to Tiffany because she is a community builder. Um, can I do that?
Yes,
Yes,
he's the
yes,
best.
yes. So my favorite definition of community is that it's a web of relationships centered around a shared responsibility.
Mm,
And right now, that responsibility is obviously to one another. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in building community is, first of all, thinking that we're building it. We're nurturing it, but also in not understanding the organic nature of its involvement. In any healthy, normal community, there'll be about 5 to 10% of people that are going to show up to everything. Going to be your hard line core people. And then there's going to be another group of people that are going to be somewhat participatory. When they see something that works for them, they'll come in. Then there's going to be a group of people that you hardly ever see. And when we try to build community, when we try to force community, our typical response is to try to get the people who are on the outside, on the outskirts, on the in. It's like, how do we get, the 50% or the 60% of the people to be the 5 or the 10%? And to be shatterproof means that we honor and we recognize where everyone is,
mhm.
that we actually build opportunities for people to onboard and to offboard and to onboard and to offboard, back and forth, just like those waves. Because if there's one thing I can say about communities of women in particular, it's that we need opportunities to engage dependent upon whatever cycle we're in at the time, in whatever level of engagement we need to at the time. But fundamentally, it's just being available. When Daisy texts me, I'm responding to the SOS in a heartbeat. And if we do that individually and in a micro manner, it will yield itself to the entire organism.
Beautiful.
That's so beautiful. I really love seeing the relationship between you and Tasha here in this space and how much you admire and respect and appreciate her, and how
And
Tasha.
vice versa.
Yeah, well, right. And also, but how Tasha showed up with so much vulnerability because you were holding the space with such generosity. And Tasha, I appreciate so much that you've come into this conversation with your personal stories and your deep wells of research. I we are all so much smarter after this time together. I thank you both for joining us here today and joining us on the list. I thank all of the people who came here. Um, I put links to buy. These are your walking. Like everybody has some marching orders. Buy the book. Buy one for a friend. Buy a third to leave behind, and spread the word about this conversation to your friends on social media. We want everybody to be shatterproof. We will all benefit from being in community with folks who are shatterproof. And I thank you, Tasha, just for writing this book. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you. And thank you for making the space and allowing this conversation to happen. I hope everybody got something from it.
Tiffany, you're the greatest. Thank you for giving up your lunch to join us and be in conversation today. Everybody else, I'll send you back to your 2 o'clock meetings. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone. Thanks,
everybody.
Tiffany. Bye, everyone.
Bye.